Chapter 2 of Audrey Craven by May Sinclair. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 2. Scandal was mistaken. Miss Audrey Craven was not in search of a religion, but she had passed all her life looking for a revelation. She had no idea of the precise form it was to take, but had never wavered in her belief that it was there, waiting for her, as it were, round a dark corner. Hitherto the ideal had shown a provoking reticence. The perfectly unique sensation had failed to turn up at the critical moment. Audrey had reached the ripe age of 10 before the death of her father and mother, and this event could not be expected to provide her with a wholly new emotion. She had been familiarized with sorrow through fine gradations of funereal tragedy, having witnessed the passing of her canary, her dormouse, and her rabbit. The end of these engaging creatures had been peculiarly distressing, hastened as it was by starvation under most insanitary conditions. The age of 10 is the age of disenchantment, for those of us who can take a hint. For Audrey, disenchantment never wholly came. She went on making the same extravagant demands, without a suspicion of the limited resources of life. It was the way of the Cravens. Up to the last her father never lost his blind confidence in a world which had provided him with a great deal of irregular amusement. But the late Mr. Craven could be wise for others, though not for himself, and he had taken a singular precaution with regard to his daughter. Not counting the wife, whom he had too soon ceased to care for, he had a low opinion of all women, and he distrusted Audrey's temperament, judging it probably by his own and that of his more intimate acquaintance. By a special clause in his will, she had to wait for her majority 4 years longer than the term by law appointed. Further, until she reached her majority, she was to spend 6 months of the year at Oxford near her guardian, for the forming and informing of her mind, always supposing that she had a mind to form. And now, at the age of 25, being the mistress of her own person, her own income, and her own house in Chelsea, she was still looking out for a revelation. Her cousin, Mr. Vincent Hardy, believed that he had been providentially invented to supply it. But in the nature of things, a cousin whom you have known familiarly from childhood cannot strike you as a revelation. He is really little better than a more or less animated platitude. Vincent Hardy would have been unaffectedly surprised if you had told him so. To himself he seemed the very incarnation of distinguished paradox. This simply meant that he was one of those who innocently imagine that they can defy the minor conventions with a rarer grace than other men. Certainly his was not exactly the sort of figure that convention expects to find in its drawing rooms at 9 o'clock in the evening. It was in Audrey's house in Chelsea, the little brown house with discreet white storm shutters that stands back from the Embankment, screened by the narrow strip of railed plantation known as Chelsea Gardens. Here or hereabouts, Hardy was to be met with at any hour of the day, and late one July evening he had settled himself as usual near a certain cosy corner in the big drawing room. His face, and especially his nose, was bronzed with recent exercise in sun and wind. His hair was limp with the steam of his own speed, and on his forehead his hat had left its mark in a deep red cincture. His loose shooting jacket, worn open, displayed a flannel shirt, white but not too white. This much of Hardy was raised and supported on his elbow. The rest of him, encased in knickerbockers, stockings, and exceedingly muddy boots, sprawled with a naïve abandonment at the feet of the owner of the drawing room. Lying in this easy attitude he delivered himself of the following address: "Life in London is a life for lunatics, and life in England generally is a glorious life for clergymen and counter hoppers, but it's not the life for a man. It was all very well in the last century, you know, when Englishmen were men first and lunatics, if they chose, or clergymen or counter hoppers afterwards. Ah, if that wasn't exactly our golden age! It was the age of our maturity, of our manhood. If you doubt it, read the literature of the 18th century. Take Fielding. No, don't take Fielding. Anyhow, since then we have added nothing to the fabric of life. To pile it on above, we've simply been digging away like mad from below. And at last our top heavy civilization is nodding to its fall. And its fall will sweep us all back into barbarism again. Then, when we are forced back into natural conditions, the new race will be born. No more of your big headed, spindle shanked mannikins. We shall have a chance then of seeing a man, that is, a perfect animal. You may turn up your nose, my superfine lady. Let me tell you that this glorious animalism means sanity, and sanity means strength, and strength means virtue. Vis vir virtus, ma'am." Hardy sat up and caressed the calves of his legs with thoughtful emotion, as if he recognized them as the sources of the moral law within him. His cousin had not followed his precipitate logic. With woman's well known aversion from the abstract, she was concentrating her attention on the concrete case, the glorious animal before her. Now it would be very wrong to suppose that Hardy was in the least tainted with socialism, anarchism, or any such pestilent heresies, or that he had read Emile and Walden. He had never heard of either of these works, and had no desire whatever for the restoration of society on a primitive basis of animalism modified by light literature, clothing, and the moral law. For all modern theories he had a withering contempt, his own simple creed being that in the beginning God made man a Tory squire. His quarrel with the social order was a purely private and particular one. In our modern mythology, custom, circumstance, and heredity are the three fates that weave the web of human life. Hardy did not wholly sympathize with this belief. He had too profound a respect for his own pedigree to lay his sins at his great grandfather's door. As the nephew of a Tory squire, he was but 2 degrees removed from original righteousness. In spite of this consideration, he was wont to describe himself with engaging candour as a bad hat. In doing so he recognized that he was a dependent part of a vast and complicated system. If he, Vincent Hardy, was a bad hat, who was to blame for it? Obviously civilization, for providing him with temptation, and society for supplying encouragement. As a consequence he owed both civilization and society a grudge. Therefore I say that a return to barbarism will be our salvation. You and I mayn't live to see the day, but here the impassioned orator, who had been making charges at his boots with the point of his walking stick, succeeded in detaching a large cake of mud which he immediately ground to powder on the carpet. Civilization personified in Audrey Craven gazed at him in polite reproach. "My new carpet will certainly not live to see it. It may be part of the detestable social order, but it is not responsible for it any more than I am." "Never mind, Audrey. It's honest Hertfordshire mud, clean from the country as God made it. If I hadn't had to cross your filthy London in order to get here." Audrey smiled, though she knew that brown streaks of the honest Hertfordshire mud marked the hero's passage from the doorway to her feet. She was naturally long suffering, and seldom repulsed any one, save a few of the more impertinent of her own sex. She lay back in her cosy corner, outwardly contemplating the unusual length of muscular humanity extended before her, inwardly admiring her own smile, a smile of indulgent lips and arch eyebrows, in which the eyes preserved a languid neutrality. Being thus pleasantly preoccupied, she may be supposed ignorant of her cousin's broad gaze of unreflecting admiration, and totally unprepared for his rapid change of theme. "Audrey," he began, with alarming suddenness, "some people would lead up to the subject cautiously. That would only waste time, and time's everything now. Is Miss Craven at home?" "Miss Craven is always at home when I am. Would you like to see her?" "See her? Good heavens, no! Do you know positively where she is secreting herself, or must I lock the door?" "That is unnecessary. She will not come in. She never does." A suspicious look darted from the corners of Hardy's eyes. "Except when I ask her," added Audrey sweetly. "Well, then, if you can insure me against the sort of interruption that annoyed me before, we will return to the question we were discussing when Oh, please don't go over any old ground. That would bore me." "It would bore me. I will begin where we left off. The problem, if you remember, was this, to put it baldly: do you care for me or do you not?" "Didn't we get any farther than that?" "No, we didn't." "Do I or do I not? Really, I cannot tell you, Vincent, for I don't know myself." "Nonsense! There's no logical dilemma. You can't go on for ever treating it as an open question." "Well, you draw such absurdly hard and fast lines. Audrey, do you honestly suppose that I've walked here 30 miles, parboiled between sun and rain, in order to be made a fool of?" In his excitement Hardy forgot that 20 miles was a precise distance, and that he had much better have taken the train. "How much longer are you going to keep up this fiendish cat and mouse sort of game?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that 10 years is a devil of a time to keep a man waiting for his answer." "10 years? 10 days, you mean." "Excuse me, I broached this subject for the first time 10 years ago." "Oh, I dare say, when we were both children." "We are neither of us children now, Audrey." "Speak for yourself. I was an infant in the eyes of the law till the other day." "You are, let me see, 5 and 20. If you have any mind at all, you must have made it up by this time." "The case would be much easier if you were not such a mass of inconsistency yourself." "I've been consistent enough in one respect. Do you remember the first time you stayed with us at Woodford, when you weren't much higher than that table, and how you and I set off together for Wanstead Woods?" "Yes, before breakfast. I have never forgotten it." "Nor I. You did rile me that day, Audrey. You waited till we came within a stone's throw of the woods, and then you sat down in a turnip field and cried because you couldn't go any farther." "After running at your heels for 2 miles, like a dog." "Yes, and with the irresponsibility of the inferior animal, eating up the whole of the cake I provided for us both." "It was perfectly fair. You dragged me out against my will." "So you argued at the time, but I couldn't follow your reasoning. Perhaps you've forgotten how I carried you on my back to Woodford, and then gave the milkman sixpence to drive us the rest of the way home. And you were such a contemptible little snob that you cried again because you had to sit next the milkman." "I remember perfectly. You only carried me as far as Red Bridge, in a position the most comfortable for yourself and the most undignified for me. You borrowed that sixpence from me and never paid me again, and we were both punished with dry bread for breakfast, because we were seen in the milk cart." "The abominable injustice of my parents was of a piece with the whole system I complain of. You will observe that we were punished, not for disobedience, but for riding in a milk cart, and not so much for being in it as for being seen in it." "Exactly. Otherwise the reminiscence would be slightly irrelevant." "Not at all. It illustrates my thoroughgoing consistency. I loved you then, in spite of your detestable conduct in the matter of that cake, and I have loved you ever since, in spite of your other faults." "Well, thank you." "I suppose you would prefer some hypocrite who told you that you had none?" "On the contrary, I enjoy being told of my faults." This was true. If it came to the point, Audrey would boldly offer her own character for dissection, rather than suffer conversation to be diverted to a less interesting topic. Hardy had rather neglected these opportunities for psychological study, and herein lay the secret of his failure. He continued, adopting a more practical line of argument, suggested by the episode of the sixpence. "It's not as if you were a millionaire and I a grovelling pauper. I shall have Lavernac and 2,000 a year when my uncle Sir Theophilus Parker dies." Hardy rolled out the title with a certain proprietary unction. His cousin had no share in this enviable relationship. "I give the old bird 5 years at the very worst, and it's a moral impossibility that he should leave me in the lurch. But I don't count on that. My own property has kept me idle all my life, but I've sold it at last, and as I said just now, I'm going out to Canada to farm." Audrey blushed, and punished her blush with a frown. If she had been playing the amusing game that Hardy suggested, it was one thing to give the mouse a little run in order to renew the pleasures of the chase, another thing to let him escape altogether from her paws. Hardy saw his advantage and followed it up. "When I told you that I had done with civilization, I suppose you thought it was a joke?" "I did, only I couldn't see the point." "The point is this, that I'm going down to Liverpool to morrow, and shall sail for Canada this day week. I can't stand it any longer. I can't breathe here. Town or country, it's all the same. The air chokes me, it's teeming with moral bacilli. You never thought I was so particular. No more did I." He paused, knitting his brows. "I admit frankly that I'm a bad hat. This place has been my ruin, as it has of many a better man than me. Perhaps if it hadn't been you, Audrey but I won't press that point. It wouldn't be generous, however just. Anyhow, whatever my past has been, my future lies in your hands. I would say your love was life or death to me, but that wouldn't be anywhere near the truth. It's not so much a question of death as a question of damnation." Hardy was desperately in earnest, but not so much so as to be careless of rhetorical effect. In his desire to represent himself as a fallen angel, he had done himself no little injustice, as well as grossly exaggerated the power of Audrey's regenerative influence. She was evidently moved. She took no pains to restrain the trembling of her lips more than was necessary to preserve their delicate outline. Hardy had paid homage to her as the superior being. It marked an epoch in the history of his passion. He rose to his feet and looked down on her as from a height. A fallen angel is not without his epic sublimity. The lady hesitated. She pulled out the tremolo stop and then spoke. "You say that if it hadn't been for me I don't quite understand you, but you are mistaken if you think I never cared for you. Never cared, I mean to say, for your good." She also rose with an air of having made a statement as final as it was clear and convincing. He laid his hand on her shoulder and looked steadily in her face. There was no evasion in her eyes, but her eyelids quivered. "It's all right, Audrey. You never have denied that you love me, and you can't for the life of you deny it now." She did not attempt to, for the entrance of the footman with coffee made denial indecent at the moment, if not impossible. That deus ex machina from below the stage retired, unconscious of the imminent catastrophe he had averted. But he had brought into the little drama a certain prosaic element. Coffee and romantic passion do not go hand in hand. Then it seemed to Audrey that the welcome interval of commonplace lapsed into a dream, in which Hardy's voice went sounding on in interminable monologue. "I shall hear the wind, Audrey, rushing over prairies infinite as the sea. I shall see the great wall of the Rockies rising sky high, and England will seem like a little piece of patchwork, with a pattern of molehills for mountains and brooks for rivers. And when I've set our Canadian farm going I shall hunt big game, and when I've exterminated the last bison off the face of the boundless prairie I shall devote myself to literature." "Literature?" she echoed faintly. It was all so grotesquely strange that even this announcement brought only a dreamlike surprise. "Yes, literature. Do you think literature is only produced by the miserable noodles who sit in their studies at home, till their muscles wither and their hearts get flabby? My book will be a man's book, with a man's blood and a man's brains in it. It will be a book that will make posterity sit up. And when you have enjoyed the fame of it a little, we'll go out again together. In Canada we shall find a new heaven and a new earth." She sat silent and passive. The situation had a charm which she was powerless to break. It seemed as if the mere brute force through which Hardy had dominated her intellect hitherto had become refined by some extraordinary process, and was exerting a moral influence over her. In order to assert herself against the intolerable fascination, she rose hastily and crossed the room to where her piano stood open in the corner. She played loud and long, wild Polish music, alive with the beating pulses of love and frenzy and despair. It would have roused another man to sublime enthusiasm or delirious rapture. It sent Hardy to sleep. Stretched on the hearthrug with slackened jaw and great chest heaving with regular rise and fall, he slept like a tired dog. She played on. And as she played he dreamed that he stood with her in the midst of the burning prairie, they two on a little ring of charred black earth, an island in a roaring sea of fire. The ring grew smaller and smaller till they could only find standing room by clinging close together. As he turned to her she thrust him from her into the sea of fire, crying, "It's perfectly fair, Vincent, for you dragged me here against my will." He woke with a snort as the music suddenly ceased. It was midnight. He had to start from home early next morning, and if he delayed longer he would lose the last train out. He parted from Audrey as only the traveller outward bound parts from his betrothed. In fact, as she remarked afterwards, for the fuss he made about it, he might have been going to the North Pole with his life in his hands. So like Vincent! As for Hardy, he felt already the wind of the new heaven and the sweetness of the new earth. Audrey was staring abstractedly into the looking glass when she heard the front door shut with a violent bang, and the sound of his quick footsteps on the pavement below. She came to herself with a cold shiver. What had she done? Surely she had not gone and engaged herself to Vincent? Bound herself, in the first year of her liberty, to a man she had known all her life, and her own cousin too? It was impossible, for you see it would have argued great weakness of mind and a total want of originality. End of chapter 2. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.